let's move on to our lesson on the menstrual cycle. Right, children, you need to understand that there are 2 cycles that are taking place every 28 days in mature females, in females who have reached puberty. Okay, what are these 2 cycles that I am talking about? Well, one is called the ovarian cycle. As its name suggests, it is the changes that happen to the ovary, and this leads to the release of an ovum during ovulation. And the other cycle is the uterine cycle, and this determines the changes that happen to the endometrium, meaning the lining of the uterus. And this cycle leads to the implantation of an early embryo. Now, both cycles, children, are controlled by what? Yes, they are controlled by the changes that take place in the levels of the female's sex hormones. Now, both these cycles are usually called the menstrual cycle because they are so closely linked. Let's begin with the ovarian cycle. Right, before we begin, I want to highlight the pituitary gland for you. Okay, now the pituitary gland is responsible for producing 2 hormones, the LH, which is the luteinizing hormone, and the FSH, which is the follicle stimulating hormone. In our picture today, you will notice that the luteinizing hormone is represented in the color red, and the FSH, or the follicle stimulating hormone, is represented by the blue. We're going to begin by highlighting that the FSH, or the follicle stimulating hormone, is being produced by the pituitary gland. Step 2, what do we say? This FSH now is going to start stimulating the development of the Kraffian follicle. So what's going to happen? When the pituitary gland starts producing FSH, you'll find that the FSH levels start to rise or start to increase, okay? And when the FSH levels start to increase, it's going to stimulate the development of the Kraffian follicle. And inside the Kraffian follicle, we will notice that there is a mature ovum. Right, the next step. Now this Kraffian follicle produces a hormone, and that hormone produced by the Kraffian follicle is estrogen. Okay, so you will see, here's our Kraffian follicle. You will find that when it is present, estrogen starts being produced, and therefore the level of estrogen starts to rise. And this starts the preparation of the uterus for the attachment of the fertilized ovum. Now kids, approximately every 4 weeks, around 28 days, this Kraffian follicle now, something is going to happen to it. It's going to rupture. Okay, it's going to break open. And when that happens, when the Kraffian follicle breaks open like this, it releases an ovum. And this process is called ovulation. Now, the ovum that's going to be released, what's going to happen to it? Very good. It's going to be sucked up by the funnels of the fallopian tube, right? Now what's going to happen to this ruptured follicle? Yes, now we go back to the top and we'll notice here's our luteinizing hormone. What's going to happen to him? What's going to happen is that the pituitary gland will start producing LH, or the luteinizing hormone, right? And when this happens, this luteinizing hormone is going to help convert this ruptured follicle into a structure called the corpus luteum. What does the corpus luteum do now? When this corpus luteum is formed, this corpus luteum is going to start secreting its own hormone. and that hormone is called progesterone. What does progesterone do? Yes, progesterone is the hormone that helps to maintain pregnancy. Now, children, if fertilization does not take place, what's going to happen? Yes, if there's no fertilization, if a sperm does not fertilize an egg cell, what's going to happen? Yes, this corpus luteum is going to degenerate, or it's going to break down. And when the corpus luteum breaks down, what's happening? You'll find that the progesterone levels also start to drop because it's not getting produced anymore by the corpus luteum. So if you look at this picture, what is happening? This corpus luteum is going to degenerate. How do we know? Well, we'll look at our progesterone levels. If the progesterone levels are decreasing, it means that the corpus luteum is degenerating and not producing progesterone anymore. In this case, the ovum was not fertilized. So what happens now to the unfertilized ovum? Very good. The unfertilized ovum then passes down the fallopian tube into the uterus and leaves the body through a process called menstruation. Now let's move on to the uterine cycle and menstruation. Now children, this uterine cycle, right? If you look at this picture, what is it describing to us? Yes, it's describing the changes that are taking place in the wall of the uterus as it gradually thickens, becomes enriched with blood vessels, up until the endometrium wall tears away, accompanied by the loss of blood. Ask ourselves, what hormone is responsible for starting the preparation of this uterus? It's the estrogen. Now children, it is the Craffian follicle that produces this hormone called estrogen. And when the Craffian follicle produces the hormone estrogen, what happens? The estrogen starts to increase. It allows the endometrium to become more vascular, allowing it to have an increased blood supply, and it makes it more glandular. So the estrogen allows the endometrium to grow to a thick, blood vessel-rich glandular tissue layer. And this is going to represent a lovely environment for the implantation of a blastocyst upon its arrival in the uterus if fertilization does take place. Right? So what have we learned? We have learned that the Craffian follicle starts to produce estrogen. Estrogen levels start to increase, and when estrogen levels start to increase, we find that it leads to the development or the preparation of the uterus for the attachment of a fertilized ovum. How? By making the endometrium thicker, by making it more vascular with an increased blood supply, as well as making it more glandular for the attachment of the fertilized ovum in the event of fertilization. Then what happens? Well, after the ovum is released during the process of ovulation, the Craffian follicle is changed into a corpus luteum, right? Then what happens? This corpus luteum will start to produce a hormone called progesterone, right? And then what happens when the corpus luteum starts producing progesterone? Yes, the levels of the progesterone also start to increase. And the progesterone also helps to continue the preparation of the uterus, just in case fertilization occurs. Now, if this ovum is fertilized by a sperm, what happens? Yes, this corpus luteum will ensure that progesterone will be continuously secreted. And that will ensure that the embryo remains attached to the uterine wall. That is, it ensures that pregnancy is maintained. But if this ovum is not fertilized, what happens? This corpus luteum is going to be destroyed. It's going to degenerate. Then the levels of progesterone are going to drop. And if the progesterone levels drop, what happens? Menstruation occurs. Then the thickened and vascularized tissue, meaning the vascularized means the tissues that are filled with all those lovely blood vessels, right, of the endometrium, is not going to be needed anymore for implantation. What's going to happen? The upper layers of the endometrium are going to break down. It's going to be shed and it's going to be discarded together with that unfertilized immature ovum, which at that stage is known as the secondary oocyte, right? It's going to exit the body through the cervix and out the vagina. And that process is called menstruation. That menstrual blood, children, will consist of endometrial tissue, blood, and also mucus. Now, this menstruation lasts for about 4 to 6 days. Then what will happen is that the endometrium once again in the uterus will immediately start to thicken again. Why? To prepare for the arrival of the next possibly fertilized ovum. Now, bear in mind, children, that some individuals may experience pain during menstruation, which may be relieved by a healthy diet and also daily exercise, while others have little or no side effects.